Duncan McNabb here. It is the 18th of October 2024, and the bizarre, long-running mystery of the homicidal Lord Lucan, the murderous British peer, is soon going to be back on the front pages around the world, courtesy of a three-part documentary from Britain's BBC, which is due to drop before Christmas 2024. It's a mystery that's fascinated me for years, and it's still got some perhaps some more interesting twists and turns all these decades later. Let me start by telling you who Lord Lucan was. Now, Lord Lucan, and I'll use that name throughout, original name Richard John Bingham, educated at Eton College, almost obligatory with these sorts of blokes, had an undistinguished career there, a very undistinguished commission in the British Army, followed by a short and very undistinguished career in banking in the City of London, the sort of trajectory for a lot of these upper class blokes. He became a professional gambler, specialising mainly in backgammon. Again, not possibly the most effective professional gambler either, because he would find himself deeply in debt. On the death of his father, he became the 7th Earl of Lucan, as I said, Anglo-Irish aristocrats. In 1963, he married Veronica, and she became the Countess, better known as her ladyship, and they had 3 kids together. Lucan drove an Aston Martin and often bragged to his mates that he'd been approached to play James Bond. Proof of that was elusive. Bottom line is, he was pretty much an upper-class wanker. Fortunately, Sean Connery got the gig instead, much better choice. The family moved to a house owned by the Lucan Family Trust. It was at 46 Lower Belgrave Street in Belgravia. They had 3 kids, 2 girls and 1 boy. This is an elegant home in one of the ritziest and priciest parts of London. The trust owned, as I said, the trust owned the house and also provided Lucan with an income, but not enough to satisfy his gambling problems. At one stage by the early 1970s, he was deeply and abidingly in debt, around about $75,000 back in those days, which is around about 550 thousand bucks in today's money. He was deeply in debt, and being able to repay it from his income was a bit of a challenge, I would suggest. Likewise, his marriage was a complete mess. He was an appalling bastard. He was violent, demanding, cruel, but he loved his kids, fortunately. The marriage got pretty much irreconcilable, and he moved out in January 1973 to a rented flat just around the corner from the family home. Divorce loomed. To add to their problems, there was a brutal and very public custody battle for the 3 kids. He accused her of being an inadequate mother with mental health problems and instability. She responded by accusing him of gaslighting her, of physical and sexual abuse and mental abuse. There are allegations that he was obsessed to win no matter what the cost. It was very, very messy, very, very problematic, and very, very public back in those days when these cases were reported on the front pages of the daily tabloids. Veronica actually won the case and got custody of the kids, but one of the requirements of that custody battle was that she had a live-in nanny. Not a terribly onerous task, and a bit more of that shortly. Now, on the evening of the 7th of November, and I'm just reading here from a couple of notes to keep us going. On the evening of the 7th of November 1974, Lucan had had dinner at the Mayfair Casino, the Clermont Club, which is owned by his mate John Aspinall, then the gambling guru of the UK. He later told friends that on his way home to his flat, he'd walked past the old family home and had seen a man attacking a woman in the basement of the family home. Now, the basement of the home in Belgrave Street, was in fact also where the kitchen was. Now, the woman, as we subsequently found out, the woman he allegedly saw being attacked was the nanny, the 29-year-old Sandra Rivet. She'd been with the family then for only 10 weeks. Police would later find Sandra Rivet in that basement kitchen, bludgeoned to death with a piece of lead pipe. Horrible, brutal disgrace. There was blood everywhere. A horrific crime scene, blood spatter patterns all over the roof, the floors, the doors, everywhere. A horrific attack. Now, what investigators later proved that Lucan's observation of seeing this woman being attacked was a complete fraud. They would later note that his story was, and I quote here from the original documents, it was an unbelievable coincidence. And what the detectives did was what detectives should always do in these cases. They walked through the evidence, they let the crime scene talk to them, and they found that Lucan could not have physically seen from the street what he allegedly saw. It's a basic investigation. So police were quite content that Lucan had been lying to them, that his evidence, the comments he'd made to his mates were just complete bullshit. What was likely to happen that night was that Lucan still had a key, so access was easy. There was no sign of forced entry. He'd gone into the family home uninvited and unexpectedly, using his key, and had stupidly in the basement kitchen mistaken the nanny, Sandra Rivette, for his wife and had attacked her, bludgeoned her to death. Now, Veronica, lady or countess, whatever you want to call her, she later told the police that she was upstairs watching TV and that Sandra had gone down to make her a cup of tea. Very nice of Sandra, but hadn't come back. So, wondering where her tea had got to, she'd gone down the stairs leading to the basement kitchen and noted that the lights in the kitchen weren't on. She called out and nothing responded. There was no response. She then said she heard a noise in the adjacent cloakroom. Shortly after that, seconds after that, she was hit on the head a few times and she started to scream, and then she recognised her husband's voice telling her to be quiet, to stop screaming. The two of them struggled quite violently, and she said that he had his hands around her throat trying to strangle her. And she did something quite smart. She got the opportunity and she kicked him hard and fast in the balls. At that point, when she did that, she thought she was about to die. She thought he was about to murder her, and that swift kick in the balls got her some respite. She then asked him about what had happened to Sandra, and Lucan, according to her, said to her, "I've killed her. She came down first. If it had been you, you would have got it." Being bludgeoned with a lead pipe, that is. When the Countess, or her ladyship, saw an opportunity to flee, she ran. And she ran to a nearby pub in Belgravia and raised the alarm. Police came very, very quickly there afterwards. She said something queerish, and I think not in the best of all possible taste. She said, when asked by the media how she survived this dreadful homicidal assault by her husband, she replied, "Good breeding. Quip didn't go down terribly well under the circumstances." Now, police arrived and they were on the scene quickly, but Lord Lucan hadn't lingered. He'd hit the road very, very quickly. He'd headed for the coast, driving an old Ford Corsair car that he'd borrowed from a mate. Now, police later found that car, the Corsair, covered in blood, smears all over it, dumped in Newhaven in Sussex. Now, Newhaven is a port with a regular service to cross to by ferry to France, and it's also, and this is a curiosity, where Lucan had also kept a motorboat. Now, his mates, and they were all upper-class toffs like Lord Lucan, said that he had probably committed suicide. His wife took a similar view, and in 2017, there's an interesting quote from her, when asked about what had happened to him, she said she thought he'd committed suicide because, and a quote here, he'd been trained to behave honourably, which is a very upper-class view of a bloke who was up to his neck in debt, a horrible custody battle for kids behind him, and a bloke who had battered a woman to death mistakenly or even deliberately in the basement kitchen, and then done a runner, leaving her for dead. It's a very strange, disordered view of what's honourable, I think. Their view was that he'd possibly thrown himself off a ferry and drowned, or one bizarre view that he'd tied bricks to himself and dropped off the side of his boat. But his body has never been found, not even a trace. Now, over the ensuing years, and as you can imagine, a massive worldwide manhunt has started. They've got pictures of this somewhat dapper-looking lord, front pages everywhere, and this hideous crime. The whole world is fascinated by this case. And there have been allegedly sightings over ensuing years in Botswana, in Mozambique, in Cape Town, and in India. Rumours abounded that he was being supported by his mates, possibly old school chums from Eton and that sort of thing, surreptitiously keeping this bastard funded. Police thought they'd actually caught Lucan back in 1974 in Melbourne. They'd found a bloke with a nice accent and good manners. He was English, obviously. They had him under surveillance for a couple of days, took him in and interrogated him. They found out that they were close to Lord Lucan, but not close enough. In fact, they'd caught the erring John Stonehouse, the British MP, who'd gone to Miami on holidays, faked his disappearance by leaving his towel and bits and pieces on the beach near his hotel in Miami and disappeared into the ocean, hoping that the authorities would believe he'd committed suicide or just drowned. The reality was he was doing a runner so he could shack up with his girlfriend, leave his family behind, and also get right out of the way of massive allegations of frauds that he committed. Now, Stonehouse was rather unlucky at this point. Not only was he arrested, he was then extradited to the UK and ended up behind bars for quite some time. Again, this has also been the subject of a very, very recent comedy drama, I think you can see on BritBox or one of the other streaming services these days. In the ensuing years, there were occasional spottings of Lucan all around the world. In 1999, the family finally bit the bullet and had him declared dead, which was done by a court in the UK. But around about this time, another story emerges slowly. A chap called Neil Berryman, a builder in the UK, has found out that he is in fact Sandra Rivett's son. She gave him up at birth. He became, or has become, somewhat obsessed, I think that's a fair way to describe it, in tracking down Lord Lucan, see if he's still alive and find him and confront him. That's what Berryman wants to do. Now, I spoke to Berryman about 5 years or so ago when I refreshed my interest in the case, having tracked him down in the UK. He told me that he had actually found Lord Lucan using facial recognition software primarily, that this facial recognition had then taken him to a house in suburban Perth occupied by a number of people, including a then about 85 or so year old Buddhist monk, and it was a Buddhist monk that Berryman believes to be Lord Lucan. Not long after this, I got approached, and this is this weirdness of television, by a young TV producer, and she assured me that it'd be quite fine if she and I went to Perth, that we gained access or broke into the share house that the old Buddhist was living in and got some toiletries like a hairbrush or a toothbrush or such, so we could then use that to do DNA testing to see if it was in fact Lord Lucan. As I pointed out to her, apart from the fact that it was incredibly illegal, there would be the issue of getting a sample from the Lucan family for comparison purposes. I haven't heard from her since, which I'm not unhappy about. I freshened the story up a couple of months back, talking again to Mr. Berryman, who now assures me that the Buddhist monk, purportedly Lord Lucan, is no longer living in Perth, but is now living in a share house somewhere in Brisbane, Queensland. And that as recently as November of last year, he was in Australia doing some filming for the BBC's documentary. He didn't want to disclose what he'd found or what he hadn't found. So stay tuned. According to Mr. Berryman, he is pretty certain that Lord Lucan is still alive, now around about 90 years old, and living as a Buddhist monk in Brisbane, Australia. Stay tuned. I'll keep you updated. I'd love to find out myself. It's one of those mysteries I just got to find the ending of. And hopefully if we can find out where Lord Lucan allegedly lives, we can go and tap on his door and see what he has to say for himself. Or is just a poor old bloke living as a Buddhist monk who doesn't know what's going on. Stay tuned. It's a fascinating story. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we might have some resolution finally. Thank you.